Will the King take away Harry and Meghan's Sussex titles? Do Catherine's parents have to curtsey and bow to her? And how do royal surnames work? We'll answer all those and a lot more in a very special episode. Hello and welcome to an unusual episode of Palace Confidential, and I say unusual as the questions are coming from you, the viewers. Answering them today are two of your favourite royal experts, the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Now, a reminder to please subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel if you don't already, and if you have any royal related questions you want to ask, then pop them in the comments below and hopefully we can return to doing this on another episode soon. So let's kick things off with a question from KK, who writes, "Love, love, love your show." Well, thank you. Just curious, do Catherine's parents curtsey and bow to their daughter? That's an interesting one, Rebecca. What can you tell us?
I'll be honest, I've never asked anyone this, but I can't imagine it happening, I have to say, given what a kind of close, normal, natural family they are. But it did start me thinking, actually, that when William and Catherine become king, would they, in a more public setting, such as a coronation or official event, if they were to attend in a kind of private capacity, you will often see as the head of state and the spouse walk past, members of the family curtsying to them. Would they do that? And I suspect they would, because they're quite a respectful family, so I suspect they would in those circumstances.
I do like to think that perhaps on the occasion of a familial tiff, that maybe Catherine says something like, "You know that I could make you curtsy to me." You would. You'd love to pull that one on your mum.
Do you know, that's the kind of thing that I've got two sisters, we would have so done to each other if we could have when we were growing up.
But you get the impression, though, don't you, Richard, they are quite formal, William and Catherine, but you get the impression that William and Catherine are probably less formal with their families.
I think so, and with their friends. I mean, I think that it seems very unlikely that they would be asking people to bow or curtsy in a private setting. I think that's for formalities. I mean, look, it's a mark of respect. You know, in America, people would be respectful of the president, whoever holds that title, and it's that sort of thing for our monarch. But when it comes to private relations, I don't think they're bowing and scraping to each other.
Fun question, though. Well, sticking with Catherine now, and Inez has a couple of questions about the royal wardrobe. I wanted to ask, where does Kate store her wardrobe at Kensington Palace? Since she's not wearing everything she owns, will she ever donate it to charity or with a fashion show? That would be amazing, wouldn't it? It would be amazing, but what about the late Queen's clothes? What's happening with those? Rebecca, you know everything about royal fashion. What can you tell us?
Oh, I don't know about that, but actually it's a good question. And yes, I think a lot of her stuff is stored at Kensington Palace, but actually they're starting to use more of the space at Windsor Castle now, because obviously that's more convenient for them. Now they're living at Adelaide Cottage. It's why actually a lot more often than not see mentions in the court circular that William and Catherine have held meetings at Windsor Castle rather than coming into London. As for the late Queen, yes, all her stuff is still very much in storage at Buckingham Palace, and I'm hopeful we might over the coming years see some more exhibitions.
Oh, I hope so.
Of her outfits over the years, because I think they're so iconic.
And what a money spinner that would be.
Well, and the palace is always looking for ways to recoup the cost of the public purse, so it'd be a perfect way to do it, in my opinion.
How many outfits do we think the Princess of Wales has?
Oh, good question.
It's like how many beans in the jar, isn't it? It's like it's just, you know.
But she has started to reuse quite a lot of stuff. We recently saw.
Still, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, we recently saw her in Wales, for example. You know, re-wearing a tweed jacket that she'd worn, you know, a number of years present. And I'm sure that's something we'll see more as she develops in a royal role, just as we saw with the Queen, Princess Anne, you know, and others.
Joe's just thinking, does she have more outfits than me? You know?
I suspect yes. Well, Karen Nemechek writes, "Love the Q&A edition. I have wondered if William and Catherine's children's surnames change with each title change of their parents." Oh, that's interesting. Are they Windsors, are they Cambridges or Waleses, and do they ever use their surnames officially for school enrolment, for example? Happy New Year from Michigan. Richard, what do they use?
Yes, well, that's quite straightforward, because they were always Wales, because he was Prince William of Wales, and so they've stuck with that. So now he's the Prince of Wales, and the children are George Wales, Charlotte Wales and Louis Wales, so they haven't had to change their titles during their schooling. So yes, they are the Walesers.
I never think of them as having surnames, do you? It's
No,
just Prince George and...
that you need them for school, and often a tradition at British public schools is you're addressed by your surname.
I know, but it's quite glamorous not to have one. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that means you're really famous, doesn't it? But oh well, there you go. That's that question answered. And now to a question from the French gardener in Palm Beach. And I think we have another one from you a little later on. They ask, do you suppose that Prince William ever chats with his children about his ancestors like Henry VIII, Edward VIII, Prince John, etc.? The family history seems to be such an important part of cultivating identity. They must do, Rebecca. Do you think?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, but in an age-appropriate way, because obviously, let's not forget, you know, George, Charlotte and Louis are still pretty young, even George, and he's...
So let's talk of decapitations at the moment. Yeah.
And I know that's something, just from speaking to people around them, that William and Catherine have actually thought quite long and hard about over the years, is how and at what stage they introduce this idea to their children that, you know, they're not entirely the same as the rest of their classmates. How do they balance that with
they must know that now.
They do, but, you know, I remember someone saying to me that, you know, George had come back, I think it's probably when he was about 5, 6, coming back, and just started to ask some unusual questions of his parents when he got home from school. So he was starting to become more aware of who he was. Obviously, maybe some of the other children have been saying things to him, you know, like my mummy says or my daddy says. Yeah. So, you know, that was something they said, we know we've got to, we need to tackle with him, but we want to do in a way that's appropriate for him and doesn't overwhelm him at all. I think as he gets older, he will learn more about, you know, the kings and queens who happen to be his forebearers, but it's been quite slow and careful over.
There was an interesting insight on that in Prince Harry's memoirs, actually, because he got a very hard time at school from one particular history teacher who would sometimes say, when it came to sort of history of the kings and queens, he would say, oh, you know, you should know that. And Harry had to admit that he was very ignorant, actually.
Right.
Almost embarrassingly ignorant about kings and queens of England.
Do you know what? I think that is embarrassing, because I think how many of us could literally trace our forebears the way that family can?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So I think eventually he gave him something like a ruler or something that had them all marked out, you know. But it was that sense of you should know this because of who you are.
Yeah.
I think with the royal family, a lot of what they do is by osmosis, you know, is just by being around these people and hearing people talk, rather than what we'd imagine them to do is sitting them down in a classroom and going, right, you need to know about your grandfather and your great-grandfather. It's a bit less formal than that.
But also imagine looking at, say, a portrait in the National Gallery of Henry VIII and thinking, oh, my forehead does that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's really weird. It's like, because the DNA's there as well.
I'm not sure I could get my head around that, to be honest.
So weird, isn't it? Well, we're staying with George, Charlotte and Louis now, as Sierra Ponce asks, Rebecca, would Princess Charlotte's future children have titles or only George and Louis? What do we know? I don't think I even completely understand the question.
This is really interesting, and it's one that I can't necessarily answer in a simple way, because I think in years gone by we would have all assumed absolutely yes they would. You know, they're senior members of the royal family, but I'm not so sure, because we're seeing times change. You know, Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, for example, actively chose for their children not to have titles or be known as, you know, prince or princess. And you know, while they're very high in the ranking of the order of succession now, you know, when Prince George eventually marries, has children, his siblings are going to go lower down the league table. So we could see a change in the future. So it's a bit of an unsatisfactory answer, I'm afraid, to say once upon a time 100% yes. In 20 years' time, who knows?
Yeah, well, a similar question from Tamaya Garner, who writes, question, will Princess Charlotte be considered the spare? Oh, that's just got such a loaded meaning now, hasn't it, after Harry's book, Richard?
I think it really has, because in the past it was always a sort of jokey way of referring to aristocrats. You know, you'd say you got the heir and the spare, which meant... And
it was never a derogatory thing, the way that Harry, I think, has framed it. It was just a joke.
Yes. Yeah. Well, a joke, but also just the sort of the wife and mother of someone with a title would sort of think, oh, my job's done now. I've got an heir and a spare, as in a second son.
Yeah.
But, you know, with Harry, with his whole, you know, book full of whinging and the whole real edge about, oh, my life's being so hard, it really just sort of changed the way we look at it, or certainly that's what Harry was trying to do, and you know, that was quite pathetic, really. But I think in this case, so it will be Charlotte, because the law was changed in Britain that you know, there's no male inheritance for the royal family. It still would be whoever is oldest, so she is the spare, so to speak. And it's a tricky one how that's handled, but I think her parents will be very sensitive of Harry's experience, and Prince Andrew is another spare who, you know, it didn't always go very well. So I think they'd be very conscious of that and how they organise things within the family.
Do you think that protocol would ever change, that the family within themselves could have a discussion and, you know, perhaps Charlotte doesn't quite fancy being the spare but Louis does, and they sort that out between themselves, or is that just verboten?
I suppose anything is possible. I'd find that a bit more unlikely. And touching back on what Richard was saying, you know, I think there's some people that might see this being the spare as actually the better option of the two, because your life is less mapped out for you. And I mean, as a mum, I don't like to kind of prejudge what children will be like in years to come, because they are only children, let them live their lives. But I've seen nothing in Princess Charlotte that makes me think she is not the boss of that family, the boss of all those three kids. So I couldn't see her being pigeonholed in any way. She you know, comes across as a really lovely, confident, natural, accomplished young girl.
The next Princess Anne.
Yeah, I've said it
Yes,
before,
and remember
said it
something
again.
really interesting is that, you know, there's been rumours that William and Catherine might not want the younger children to have formal royal roles.
Yeah.
You know, we just don't know. So if, for example, Charlotte is able to have a career or a different life outside the royal family, she might be thrilled with that, and it would be, you know, George who might have to be resentful of knowing what he has to do with his life. So,
I mean, the fact is, Tamaya, we just don't know, but it's interesting, isn't it?
It's a great topic for debate, and shows you how the family is constantly fluctuating as they need to do in order to be relevant in a modern age.
And we're staying with titles and designations for a moment, because here's a nice comment from Joyce Kaminsky. Thank you for a lovely show answering viewers' questions. I am always confused about the HRH designation. Why do some royals have it and some don't? And how can you lose it, a la Prince Andrew? Rebecca, what's with the HRH?
So, the title, who can use an HRH?
You just took a very deep breath then. There's obviously a complicated answer coming.
It's complicated but kind of simple in some ways. This basically dates back to George V in 1917, who issued what's called letters patent. And that's actually the written will of the monarch, which is effectively the law.
Yeah.
And he decreed that the only people that could be HRH,
His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness,
Prince or Princess, would be the children of the monarch, the sons of the children of the monarch, or the eldest son of the Prince of Wales.
Well, I'm confused already.
So very, very male-dominated, I think, is what you need to take away from that.
Okay.
Actually, Queen Elizabeth, brilliantly, I think, changed that slightly. So when William and Catherine were expecting their first child, she issued her own letters patent to say that that actually whatever sex that child would be, whether it would be male or female, would be the next in line to the throne. So we have seen this changing over the years. So basically, there's been a lot of kind of misnomer, I think, about Princess Anne. People have often kind of said, oh, Princess Anne chose not to have titles for her children. In actual fact, according to those letters patent, Zara and Peter would have never been Prince or Princess or HRHs. However, in that situation, what we may have expected is the Queen to say, look, because you are my beloved daughter, my Princess Royal, would you like your children to have titles? And Anne made very clear that if that were to be asked of her, the answer would be no. On the other hand, we've seen Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, whose children would have expected to be HRHs and Prince and Princesses. They've actively decided they didn't want that for their children. So every generation slightly tweaks the rules.
Yeah.
To suit what they want, I suppose, because they're royal family and they can do things like that.
And we should say that Prince Andrew hasn't lost his HRH, for example. He still is His Royal Highness. He was asked not to use it in formal correspondence, formal business, which was the same
exactly,
which was the same for Prince Harry.
Prince Harry, except we have seen in recent, weeks and months with some of the stories that have come out about Prince Andrew's ongoing business dealings that people have been floating that HRH title around on his behalf.
And what was the story with both Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, when they divorced Charles and Andrew?
So when you divorce, in their case, well, in Diana's case, she lost her HRH. So she became, and basically you get a comma in your name. So instead of the Princess of Wales, she was Diana, the Princess of Wales, which is basically, I suppose, a shorthand way of saying Diana, formerly the Princess of Wales. Now, there were some people who felt that she shouldn't have lost her HRH status, and that seemed a little bit punitive, but that is generally what happens.
Mm. And did that happen with Sarah Ferguson as well?
Yeah, well, she is now known as Sarah, Duchess of York, instead of the Duchess of York, although people still use the shorthand of the Duchess of York.
Yeah.
Well, Prince Andrew's never remarried, you see, so there's no other Duchess of York, so Fergie can still use it if she wants to.
Oh, there you go. Well, that works out for everyone. Now, speaking of titles, we have had a couple of quite mischievous questions along a similar line. You lot are terrible.
I think I know where this is going as well.
From Margaret Wolfe, who asked, when will Charles III take away the Sussex titles? While Savannah Dawkins was more direct, how long is KC3? KC3 sounds a bit R2D2 to me. How long is KC3 going to put up with the dastardly duo without taking their titles away? Now, Richard, they're no longer HRHs. But from a technical point of view, could he take away the titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex?
Strictly speaking, they are actually still HRHs, but like with Prince Andrew, they were just not asked not to use those titles in official business.
Yeah.
But KC3, or King Charles III, as we...
it might stick, KC3.
We prefer to refer to him.
Yeah.
The truth is, he can do that whenever he wants. I've called for him to do this in several articles
you have?
that I've written, but so far he hasn't listened to me.
Oh.
But no, he can do it whenever he wants. It's very straightforward, and he issues, some command or however you want to say it, letters patent, sends it to Parliament, gets parliamentary approval for them to have their title stripped, or for them to be removed, from Harry to be removed from the line of succession. So it can be done whenever he chooses.
I mean, it would be a big antagonistic move, wouldn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, and I've nailed my colours to the mast on this, from day one, having spoken to people, pretty close to the King. And the feeling was, from the start, to do that would be seen as unduly punitive. It would be almost like echoing what happened to his late mother. And I think, as we said just a few minutes ago, that there were those that felt that was unfair on the Princess of Wales, the late Princess of Wales, and it's just not something he would do.
Frankly, you don't want to give him something else to whinge about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it would add to that sense of victimhood.
Yeah. And
I think certainly as we film this programme, and who knows the twists and turns that is going to go on over the years to come, but the feeling is that at some point there may be a time that the King and Prince Harry might start to repair their relationship slightly, and if he was to have done that, that would have probably been quite a big stumbling block to it. So who knows? Look, I mean, you can never say never, but I really think that's not going to happen in that case.
Okay, well, you've heard it here first. Now, we're sticking with the Sussexes for now, the Sussexes as they are. Judy K. Anderson asks, does Harry own any of the properties owned by the royals or by England and loaned to the family? I feel like you're going to know everything on this, Richard. Does he?
So no, he doesn't. And their last property they had was Frogmore Cottage, which was given to them as a gift by Queen Elizabeth, and then that's all gone. And that's one of the big things about quitting royal duties, leaving the country. I mean, my goodness, if Harry and Meghan had stayed, I mean, I'm sure they would have been very generously looked after by King Charles, and for example, they would have almost certainly been given a Scottish residence, I would have thought. And there's various places that they would have been offered. We've seen with William and Catherine that they have, they've got a country place in Norfolk, they've got a place at Windsor, and then Kensington Palace. So Harry and Meghan would have had places like that, but they've instead they prefer their villa in Montecito, California.
Indeed. But Rebecca, obviously our king is a man of some means. If he wanted to, he could provide Harry with property, but I guess in the current situation, is that quite complicated?
I suppose he could provide them with the property out of his personal fortune as a father, buy him a house somewhere. I mean, he could do that. They don't tend to do that, but, you know, he could do. Because, of course, a lot of these properties are what we call Crown Estate properties. So they're not actually the King's property. It's actually owned by an independent organisation, but obviously with very close links with the Crown, which is why they will have a lot of these properties on long-term leases, such as Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew has a 150-year lease on it. It's a Crown Estate property. So although we say it's his house, he ultimately doesn't own it, he couldn't sell it, but you know the assumption is that lease may be then taken up by another generation of the royals. And obviously Frogmore was one of those such properties. So if Harry decided he wanted to come back and spend more time in the UK because he'd cleared up these ongoing concerns he's got about security or had repaired his relationship with his family, they could still offer him a Crown Estate property. And of course Frogmore is still empty. And has been empty ever since they were kicked out by the King because of this ongoing situation. So, you know, depends if Prince Andrew takes up residence in it, and we don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, everyone's really down on Frogmore. I'll have it.
I mean, it's modest, I've been told, compared to something like Royal Lodge, but it's still a really glorious 5-bedroomed home with stunning grounds in them.
In a very good location.
Yeah.
Location, as we know, yeah.
Let's hear from Cindy Marchak now, who writes, from where I sit in Tucson, Arizona in the USA, the middle of the desert, I want to compliment all of the contributors on Palace Confidential. Well, thank you. I enjoy keeping up with the royals and all the goings on. Rebecca, congrats. You look quite beautiful. Congrats on your face, Rebecca. My question, Cindy's question is this. If Harry and Meghan were wanting to live their lives privately, why does the media, both in the US and in England, even bother to report on anything concerning them? Not a judgment, but a question and observation. I bet you've got something to say, Richard. How would you answer that?
Well, at the Daily Mail, our duty is to write about stories and people we think the readers will be interested in. And, you know, we know that they are very interested in Harry and Meghan still. And, I mean, really, what's interesting is how that's changed, because people used to love reading about Harry, frankly, because they really loved him. He was the most popular member of the royal family. But these days, they seem to prefer sort of seeing what Harry and Meghan are doing, because it's sort of like cringy. It's now, oh no, what are they up to now?
Yeah.
But they are still interested, for better or worse.
And sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I would add to that to say that, unfortunately, some of the decisions they make still have an effect on our royal family, both practically and the way they're viewed publicly. And a lot of what they've done in recent years in terms of the books, the attacks on them, unfortunately that's something the family is still struggling to distance themselves from reputationally, which I would say is very unfair on the royal family, but unfortunately that's the way it is. So as I say, I think it will become less relevant as the years go on, but for the time being it still has an effect on our
And it's unusual.
Now.
I mean, come on, you know, we've got, you know, there's a programme with Meghan on Netflix, a whole series. Well, you don't often have members of the royal family having a whole series on TV.
It is news.
So
it's news.
We want to know what that's about.
Well, that brings me to a point I wanted to raise that's, you know, I have got a slight issue in the question of them wanting to live their lives privately. I just don't think they actually do want to live their lives privately. And I think a lot of people felt like, well, fair enough, they don't like being under the scrutiny of being part of the royal family, but I think they still want to be famous. Am I wrong?
They certainly want the fame that's associated with making a lot of money, you know, minimum effort with maximum output. So they do want that. I would argue maybe Harry wants privacy more than Meghan, I would say, just knowing what he was like as a member of the royal family. And he always slightly struggled with, you know, his time in the public spotlight. There's some things he liked about it, there's other things he didn't. But, you know, I have to say, I agree. I mean, I don't think they've been, you know, based on, you know, the fact they've done multiple television shows, interviews, books. They are a couple who are struggling to stay out of the spotlight.
I'm reminded of the South Park parody of the World Privacy Tour. It's like, you know, that's kind of where I'm at.
And I have to say, I think that, although kind of people were laughing about it at the time, was hugely damaging for them reputationally, because I think it put into a very relatable way what a lot of people were thinking.
Well, moving on to the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh now, and to a question from Anne Garnsey, who asks, I still want to know about Bagshot Park, where Edward and Sophie live. Do they own it? Rebecca, what do we know about Bagshot?
Well, going back to our previous conversation, Bagshot Park is one of these Crown Estate properties, so actually the simple answer is no, they don't. But very much like Royal Lodge and other properties, it was kind of given, in inverted commas, to them as a wedding present by the Queen, and they have a 150-year lease on it. Now, we don't know what the terms of that lease is, we don't know.
Where is it, remind me?
It's in Surrey.
Yeah.
It's a kind of stone's throw from Windsor, which has been lovely, because that's why they had such a good relationship with the Queen, and their children were able to see so much of the Queen and Prince Philip as they were growing up, because they really weren't that far away. So you know, they've got it for 150 years, so you know, we're never going to see them moving out of it, but it's not theirs to own. They can't sell it. I'm sure if they wanted one of their children, James or Louise, to inherit it after them, that would be possible under the terms of the lease. But
and they want to stay there, and no one wants them out, so it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
No one's got any beef with the
very straightforward.
Yeah, blimey, that's unusual. Well, Catherine writes, I'm curious about what languages members of the royal family speak. I understand King Charles speaks German and has studied Welsh. I'm not aware of other members of the family speaking a language other than English. In my humble opinion, I would think Welsh would be mandatory for the family, as they often meet heads of state from around the world. I would think members of the family would learn at least another language or two. Europeans are known for being multilingual. Is this true for the royal family? That's an interesting question, isn't it, Rebecca? But there are a few languages among them. Am I right?
It's a great question, actually. That's kind of put me on the spot, but I think I've got some answer to it. Go back a generation, Queen Elizabeth was fluent in French. She didn't go to school, but she was educated at home, and she was educated to speak the French language, which interestingly is why until very recently, even the menus at state banquets were issued in French, regardless of who the guest was, regardless of the fact that most of us were trying to read them, were English. And we'd often sit there on the night of a state banquet. We were put into a little separate room, and after having looked at the table, we watched proceedings on TV, and we're given the menu. And we're all sitting there kind of, you know, with our dictionaries or trying to Google it. It's like, what on earth does this long word mean? When actually it's something like turbot, you know. So she spoke fluent French.
What's wrong with an entrecôte and frites? Eh?
Exactly. You won't get that at a state banquet. If you ever get invited, just to kind of manage expectations, Joe. So King Charles, did speak very fluent Welsh, and he actually actively learnt the language, went to school to learn it when he became Prince of Wales. I also happen to know in recent years he's been having lessons in Arabic. He was very interested to learn to speak Arabic as part of this role he developed as Prince of Wales of promoting community and interfaith harmony.
Great.
He also speaks pretty rudimentary but good, you know, nevertheless quite good French. And I always notice with the King, when he goes anywhere or when he has an incoming state visit, he makes a point of learning some of that language so he can introduce it into his speeches. So, you know, I was at Highgrove with him a few weeks ago and we heard him speak in Italian. And actually I asked, people around the royal family tend to always say, oh, they're wonderful. But actually I spoke to somebody who said, actually, it was genuinely pretty good. His accent wasn't that bad. And we've also seen...
not that bad. Oh, damning with faint praise.
There's some great video footage, I think, from back in the day when he went to Papua New Guinea and he spoke in pidgin English. Which was something to behold, and Prince Philip actually gave a speech in pidgin English as well. So he's pretty well versed. Queen Camilla, I learnt the other day, and I didn't know that. She went to school in Paris for a year, so her French is not that bad. I did not know that about her.
And I believe Princess Anne speaks German?
She does. I mean, Prince William, I'll be honest, I don't know what second language he speaks, but in English schools we're all taught a second or often third language. It's often German or Spanish or French, sometimes Italian.
And a former unsung hero, Prince Michael of Kent, can do Russian?
Russian, yeah. He's obviously got very strong links with the Russian royal family. I think the trouble is, as a race, as English speakers, we are quite lazy about our languages.
Well, I was going to ask our panel, how many languages do you guys know?
Oh, Joe, that's me.
You speak Spanish, don't you, Richard?
Yes, I've got a degree in Spanish and I did French at school.
Dreadful. I speak English and Australian. That's about it.
I did schoolgirl French, and I speak Spanish, you know, a bit better than schoolgirl Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
Although when we were at this Italian dinner at Highgrove the other day, the Italian, very charismatic Italian chef put me on the spot and said, well, do you speak any Italian? Because I was commenting on how brilliant his English was, that he even knew English slang. And he said, well, what do you say in Italian? And all I could say was 4 beers, please, in Italian.
Well, that's very useful.
I said after spending a couple of months there, that's about the only thing I can remember, but he actually thought that was quite funny.
Oh, did he? Okay, all right. Because if it was a French person, probably would have looked at you in disgust.
He found that quite funny.
Anyway, well, what do you make, Richard, of the suggestion that Catherine makes that they should all speak Welsh?
I love this suggestion. I mean, Welsh is a difficult language to learn, but when Prince Charles became Prince of Wales, he went on an intensive, I think it was like 9-week course at Aberystwyth University to make sure that he could speak Welsh. But I'm not sure I would introduce it for the rest of the royal family as well. That could be quite extreme. But then again, yeah, great. I don't speak Welsh myself, even though I did go to the University of Wales, so I'm not going to lecture others on learning the language.
It is a difficult
I know one word in Welsh.
Oh no, what is it?
Actually, no, I know how to say good morning and good night, but also cwtch, which means
mean?
cuddle in Welsh. And they use it for everything.
But it's spelled like with a W in it, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, there's an insight into Rebecca's private life.
Richard, because you say to your kids, come and have a cwtch.
Okay.
And it's a very sweet word.
Oh, can I have a cwtch later?
You can have a cwtch, Joe.
Right, well, to a question now about a royal who is sadly no longer with us, and this is from Stephen R, who asks, the Queen Mother was said to enjoy the Goring. Any information about their love, the royal family, of this famous hotel? Now, Richard, you're an expert on the society scene, venues. This question you must have all the answers.
I do love the Goring. It's a great hotel, and it's literally a stone's throw from Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
Which is why it became very popular, particularly with Queen Elizabeth. We were talking about Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother then, but her daughter, Queen Elizabeth as well, who'd often have parties there and events for staff. But it's a family-run hotel. There's lots of sort of character to it. And in fact, the Queen Mother was such a regular that there was a particular dish which she really loved, and they sort of added it to their menu, and it's still there.
Oh,
I'm trying to think what it was. I think it's eggs drum kilbo. It's basically quail's eggs with lobster.
No, so not ordering that.
No, I think it's very tasty. I have tried it myself, and that's on the menu there. So yeah, great place.
And apparently Princess Catherine doesn't mind a bit of a stop at the Goring.
Well, that's where all the family, all the Middleton family stayed. They basically sort of hired the whole hotel before Catherine's wedding, and you might remember seeing the first glimpses I think we had of her dress was her leaving the hotel. So it's very happy memories.
It's very old English, I would say, and it's got a very pretty garden, which obviously is quite unusual in central London. So it's and it's not really overlooked. It's very private, so it's everything that they could possibly want. I
have to say, the few occasions that I met Queen Elizabeth, all of them were at the Goring.
The few occasions that you met Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Wow. This hasn't come up very often, has it?
No, it's in Queen Elizabeth or Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother?
Queen Elizabeth, the monarch.
Yeah.
Wow.
She did like attending parties there.
I have invested in quite a few glasses of champagne at the Goring. It's a nice bar.
Now?
Yeah, it's a nice bar. Well, Pam de Cavett asks, why is Camilla Queen Consort, but Prince Philip wasn't King Consort? What's the answer, Rebecca?
Well, King Consorts don't exist, but let me take you back a step. So every spouse of a king is a Queen Consort, but they never use that title. And we had do you remember a big debate about this when...
I don't like the word. It reminds me too much of the word concubine.
That's one way of looking at it, Joe.
I like it, yeah.
But also there's a big debate when, King Charles acceded the throne as to why they referred to Camilla as Queen Consort to start off with and then dropped it after a few months. And that was simply because, look, it was very raw. If someone said the Queen, they would have automatically thought of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But after a time, they decided to adopt what we've always adopted. And of course, that's why the Queen Mother was Queen Elizabeth. We've had Queen Mary, Queen Alexandra. It's always been Queen. We've never called them Queen Consort. But the equivalent king consort doesn't exist, and that goes back to kind of good old-fashioned sexism, that a king would always be considered more senior than a queen. And obviously when you have a queen regnant, who is the person who's in the bloodline, who was actually the monarch, you know, you didn't want someone that would be kind of higher up than her effectively. Yeah. So what they've done is kind of make up the rules as they go along. So every husband of a queen regnant, they've effectively chosen their own title. So right. Prince Albert became Prince Consort after a while. Now we know that Prince Philip didn't want that, but what he was, although he was a prince of Greece, so they made him a Prince of the United Kingdom and then gave him the very senior title of Duke of Edinburgh. So they kind of made up the rules as they go along. There's also another strand to this that basically kind of also dates back to the Tudor times, when Queen Mary, the daughter of Henry VIII, was on the throne, and she married King Philip of Spain. Now, they were both fervent Catholics at a time when the country was being alternated between Protestantism and Catholicism. So when Protestantism came back in, they wanted to ensure that, you know, if a future queen ever married someone outside of the religion, that they wouldn't use it as a back door to get Catholicism back in. I mean, sorry, you did ask the question, Jo, and you want a proper answer.
It's just amazing. Just coming back to Prince Philip for a minute, Richard, he wasn't overly happy with the surname situation, was he?
No, I think as anyone who watched the Netflix series The Crown will know.
That documentary.
Well, often Netflix was very inaccurate in a lot of its depictions, but in this case it was largely accurate, in that there was a disagreement between Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip over surnames. And what this was about was Prince Philip was, you know, he was a proud man, and he wanted to keep his surname, which was Mountbatten, and he wanted that to be for his children. Well, the Queen insisted eventually, she may have been advised on this, that they needed to keep the name Windsor. Now, Windsor was the name adopted back in 1917, when, you know, there was a lot of anti-German feeling, obviously, during the First World War, and you also had the revolution in Russia, you know, where the royal family were murdered. So it was a very sensitive time for the royal family, and so they dropped their German name, which Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, if I pronounced that correctly,
well done. Yep.
And replaced it with the very English Windsor. So the Queen was keen to maintain this, so they came to a compromise where the children, the male children, would be Mountbatten Windsors. And we've seen that. They still use it for the male line, and in fact the viewers might remember that Prince Harry and Meghan named their children when they were Archie and Lilibet, they were Archie Mountbatten Windsor, so they've kept using those surnames as well.
And take it right up to present day, and there's a certain little cute puppy dog called Windsor, I believe.
Yeah, that's my dog, it's Windsor, but that was because
the lineage?
Well, sort of, in that he came from a farm where you could literally see Windsor Castle in the background.
So. We would expect nothing less of you, Richard.
Exactly. Well, the French gardener's back and asking, why did Prince Philip live on the farm apart from the Queen? Did he simply like being out of the limelight toward the end of his life? Rebecca, what was going on there? Is it just the secret of a blissfully happy marriage, separate houses? What?
It sounds like they've got it nailed to me, doesn't it?
It certainly did, yeah.
So when Prince Philip retired from public life in, I was going to say 1917, 2017.
Yeah, just 100 years out.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a leap.
Sometimes with this job it feels like you lived 100 years in one day, I tell you, love.
Yeah.
In 2017, one of the things he wanted to do at the grand old age of 96, and I think everyone felt, including his wife, he'd earned that retirement, was he really wanted to step away from the public, you know, limelight. He didn't want a half in, half out option. He said, like, I've done my bit, that's it. And as part of that, he wanted to go and live a quiet life in the countryside. You know, he didn't want to be in the bubble of Buckingham Palace. And they had this wonderful property, Wood Farm at Sandringham, which is grand by most circumstances, but not overly so. In fact, they needed to kind of put in a new bathroom for him to really make it habitable for someone to live in full time. And he wanted to paint there, he wanted to pot around the fields, have friends to stay. And, you know, I'm sure it was a matter of, you know, regret for her in some ways, but she just genuinely felt that she needed to do her duty by her husband, and he'd earned it. And she still would go and visit him very regularly, Sandra. And obviously when we had the COVID pandemic, they actually moved back in together because they realised they wouldn't see each other for such long periods of time. I know, it feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? You know, and I think most people would understand in the circumstances that was, you know, perfectly acceptable.
Scott McCarter's up next, and he writes to ask, do the panel think His Majesty will appoint the biographers of both his parents in 2025, as a decent interval will have elapsed since their deaths? My picks would be Robert Hardman for Prince Philip and Andrew Roberts for Queen Elizabeth II. Rebecca, gosh, I'd never thought of that. It's an interesting process of picking biographers, isn't it?
It is. It's not something they put out a job advert for. No. It's more done in terms of kind of hushed conversations with people in the know. Who do we think would be the suitable person to handle this? Because, you know, it's a historic project.
Do people campaign for it? Do they put themselves forward?
I'm sure they do, but in a kind of slightly more subtle way,
right,
rather than a vote for me type way. I mean, obviously when Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, died, they appointed William Shawcross, her biographer, within a year. So I can understand why the question is phrased in this way. Look, it's been a suitable period of time, it's been a couple of years. Would we not see that now? The only thing I would say is that I think, obviously because she was monarch and she ruled for 70 years, the project of taking on the Queen Elizabeth,
the pressure,
you know, her diaries, her papers spanning that time, it would be a full-time job, probably lasting decades itself to do it justice. So I can imagine that's something they won't rush into. Also, a lot of things she would have been writing about would have been in, for us, you know, fairly recent memory, and I can imagine there might be some kind of diplomatic issues, you know, going forwards. I tell you what, though, I would love to get my hands on Prince Philip's papers. Oh, yeah. Can you imagine the honesty he would have used in them? I mean, whoever... I can
imagine there's some salty text in there.
Bags Prince Philip's papers, I think that's going to be a great, great job.
Gosh, well, that's amazing. Now, Melinda Flick wants to know, did a lot of the royal family smoke at one time? I thought Princess Margaret used to. I know I've seen many pictures where she was smoking. Richard, are they big old smokers?
Well, smoking's a big issue for the royal family because of George VI was a heavy smoker and then had lung cancer, and this really haunted the Queen, I think. And in fact, Prince Philip was a smoker, but he gave up on the day of his wedding because he knew how much his wife hated the habit and thought now's a good time to give it up. But not many members of the royal family smoke now. I think Queen Camilla's given up. Prince Harry certainly used to smoke, and in fact it's well known that he would smoke other substances too. But that's in the past, according to his book. Yes. So we'll make that clear for legal reasons. But otherwise now, I'm not sure who else smokes. If they do, they keep it pretty quiet. I think Princess Eugenie certainly used to smoke. I've seen her, I think, having a fag or two. Yeah. But anyway, maybe you should keep that quiet.
That's why you're such a good social diarist, Richard. You don't keep it quiet, you tell everyone.
The problem with being a diarist is that the best thing is to smoke, because a lot of the gossip you'll get will be when the smokers leave the buildings these days to go and stand outside, you know. So even if you don't smoke, you need to sort of hang round and maybe pretend to.
I did a couple of interviews a year or so ago to mark Prince Edward's 60th birthday, and someone who does a lot of work with him in a kind of charitable field and has a lot of admiration to him said, "Oh, I've got a great story about Camilla." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "We had a great conversation with her when we were both happened to be at this party together." And I mean, this was many, many moons ago. And we were both outside having a quick cigarette, you know, behind the bushes so no one could see us. You know, we were sharing a packet of fags together. But you're right, I mean, she hasn't smoked for, I would say, 10 or 15 years, maybe more.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the quick king likes the habit, does
he really doesn't like it. I suspect personally because he's quite a healthy person, and also because of his grandfather as well, who he does have certain memories of.
It stinks.
Yeah, and we're living in different times now, where it kind of is much less acceptable.
Well, I think we should say that the first monarch, James I, when at the time when you know, tobacco was coming from the Americas. He thought it was revolting. He actually wrote a treatise against tobacco and talked about how unpleasant it was.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
I did not know that.
He was one of the early pioneers of the anti-smoking movement.
Every day is a school day on Palace Confidential.
It's
great, isn't it? Now, finally, we have a question from Brian Battle, probably the most pressing one for me. Is that man a Hank Marvin lookalike? Here they are on screen, side by side. Richard, are you? We assume that he's talking about our own Richard. We'll put him and rock legend Hank up on the screen and you can compare. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And of course, any other questions that you may have. Care to comment, Richard?
I think it's just the glasses, actually. Maybe I should change my specs. But Hank Marvin's a great man. Lived in Perth, Australia, I think, for many years. So I'm honoured to be compared to the great guitarist.
And as they say, have you ever seen them in the same room together?
Well, quite. You've made us think, Brian Battle. But thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back on Thursday with a regular episode of Palace Confidential, so make sure that you tune in for that. And the best way not to miss it is to subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel. My thanks as always to Rebecca, Richard, and to you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.